Alright guys, in today's video what we're going to be working on the Chevrolet Cobalt, we've got this situation with the air conditioning. And the situation we've got is that the driver's side vent and the center vents are warm, but the passenger side vent is cool. Alright, so we haven't been running it long, but we've had it in here for a little while here, and we can see that we're sitting somewhere around 50 degrees on our meter. And if we take our meter and bring it over here to the center console, and just to kind of speed it up, we'll go ahead and turn the fan up a little bit. We'll notice that it's going to immediately start warming up. Now, what causes a problem like this where one side's cold and the middle and the other side are not cold, that they're warm? Well, on a vehicle of this vintage, there is not bi-zone temperature controls. Everything is the same. So in this kind of vehicle, this kind of symptom is indicative of a leak. When you catch a leak at a certain point, you can get a situation where one side is still cooling and the other side is not. So let's pop under the hood and start hunting for this leak. Alright guys, to get some access in here, we're going to have to remove this plastic cover on this particular vehicle. Take the oil filler cap off and just work it off the little rubber bushings that it sits on. And we'll put the cap back on to keep any debris from ending up inside there. And now what we're going to want to do is start a visual inspection. We'll just start a regular visual inspection first. We've got our two charging ports here and here. We're going to be looking for any type of visual signs of oil, right? Because if it's leaking compressor content, refrigerant's going to have oil in it. You'll see what looks like an oil stain. We'll do a visual inspection first of all these lines. Route them all the way through the front down to the compressor. We're going to get the vehicle up on the ramps the way you see, and we're going to see if we see anything visual. Second, we're going to go through all of these points with a UV detector. This particular vehicle is loaded with UV dye in the refrigerant, and between one of those two, we'll get some clues as to where this leak is coming from. When we find something, we'll bring you back. All right, guys, you can use just about any kind of kit. This is what I like using, this Leak Finder LF400. It's going to be a pair of safety goggles that are yellow tinted, and then you're going to have a UV flashlight powered by AA batteries. I like using these AA lithiums from Energizer because they're not going to explode, guaranteed, and you never have the device ruined. Anyway, we'll go use this. We'll try to find our leak by seeing the dye. When we find the dye, the UV light is going to make it glow green. All right, guys, the leak is on the condenser. Let me kind of zoom in here a little bit, position the camera, shine the UV light up in here. Hopefully you guys can see it light up. You can see right back in there. Try to zoom in a little bit more here. See, right back in there is where it's all green. And that's where our leak is, on the back of this condenser. So we're going to have to replace this condenser to address the leak. And then just for comparison, guys, here's a view with the yellow tape on the camera so that hopefully it accentuates this green color that we're seeing when we shine the ultraviolet light back here. Right, that's what the UV dye does to help you locate these kind of problems. All right, guys, let's use our leak detector to kind of double check this. All right, so that's confirmation. We've got both a visual confirmation with the dye, and we've got an audible confirmation with the leak detector. So let's go ahead and pull this condenser. All right, guys, before we can pull the part, we're going to have to evacuate out the residual refrigerant from the AC system. So we're going to use our recovery machine and our recovery mate to do that purpose. Everything's all set together here. We're going to kick it on, and it'll record the weight of what it retrieves and shut itself off automatically. We'll see where it is left off. If you're interested in how this system works, I've done a video on it before. I'll link it up in the upper right corner. Otherwise, let's get started. All right, guys, we're just checking in on it here, making sure that we're actually putting weight into the tank. And that's it. So we actually didn't even have enough to run very long. I had just turned it on, was just going to let you guys see it go up, and so all we've got is 0.2 of a pound of refrigerant left in the system, so she definitely has a leak. right, now that it's evacuated, we're going to just go do a vacuum on it, and then we'll get started removing the condenser. All right, guys, now that we've got everything recovered, I'm going to go ahead and run a vacuum. Even though we've got this leaky component, there could still be some residual refrigerant in there. We don't want to have it shoot out when we remove the line. So even after the recovery machine has gone as far as it can go, I like to run the vacuum for about 10 minutes or so just to get any last drops that might be in there. All right, guys, let's take a look at what the GM service manual describes as what we're going to need to do. This is the 2009 A-Car manual, which will cover this particular vehicle as well as some others, including the Pontiac G5. We go to the air conditioning section, and we go to the air conditioning condenser replacement. So they talk about removing the charged air cooler pipe, recovering the refrigerant, raising the vehicle, removing the compressor hose, which is the upper connection, removing the condenser tube, which is the lower connection, and then removing the two 10mm bolts that are securing the condenser, and then unsnapping them from the clips. And then removing these baffles on either side. Not sure why they're telling you to remove the baffles. Let's get under there and see why they're bringing that up. It's a pretty straightforward job to remove these guys. All right, guys, so here's the radiator. Here's the AC condenser. It sits right in front of the radiator. And the first two connections we're going to remove are those two hoses that we saw in the service manual. They're held in by 13mm bolts. There's one here, and then there's one right up here. And then there's a sealing washer in between them. So like I mentioned, we put a vacuum on this thing so that we don't have to worry about any refrigerant popping out on us. Just going to loosen this up. Probably going to hear a hiss with the vacuum. It's kind of a long bolt. Once we got this guy out of the way, we can wiggle this hose loose. All right, that was our vacuum sound. There's our sealing washer on the end. Now, just to keep this guy from getting any crud on him, what I like to do when we're working underneath like this and it's close to the ground, you're not on a lift, we're going to put a little plastic baggie around this guy and rubber band him until we get the condenser out of the way where we can pop off the seal and clean it up. All right, so there's one. And then we're going to reach up and get this other guy. Since we already got rid of the vacuum, we won't have any hiss on this one. I'm going to actually have to get a little tiny extension to grab this guy. So let me go do that. All right, guys. Stick a wobbly on there. Swivel will be enough to get this. The frame cross member right here is in the way, so you really can't get an extension on here. I think what I'm going to do just to speed this up is we'll just zip this guy off. Now we got him loosened up. It's just super cramped. There we go. And we'll just work this guy loose, and we shouldn't hear any hiss anymore because we already got past that with the other one. And there's this guy, and you can even still see some of the dye on there, hopefully. You can make that out. We'll stick a little plastic cover on him, and then we'll switch over, get our 10 millimeters, and work this guy loose. All right, guys, so there's the first 10 millimeters right above this mounting block where we pulled the hoses off. Guy right here, and then the other one's on the driver's side. All right, guys, and the other one's right here. Make sure you're wearing eye protection There's a lot of crud that'll be on here. Okay, so get your hand underneath it before you move this the rest of the way, because it's really nothing else holding this in but the two clips at the top. We just give it a tug, and out she comes. Okay, just fold her underneath, and you can get this out just fine, just being on ramps or jack stands. All right, guys, we're going to replace this condenser with a GM 2084 1583, and then the two sealing washers we're going to use. The larger one is a 1357 9648. And the smaller one is a 1357 9649. So those are the only three parts we're going to need. Let's go ahead and flip our box over. I'm going to go ahead and get this unstrapped from here, then we'll lay it down next to the old one and compare, and then we'll get it remounted. All right, guys, we're going back to the manual before we remount it, because under the installation procedure, what we got to remember is that the old condenser would have had a bit of pag oil contained within it, and so we're going to have to replace what is lost by removing this component, and then we'll just reverse what we did. And by the way, we can see there's no need to remove these baffles. I'm not really sure why they had that in there. It's not an indication to replace them, and it really is unnecessary in my opinion, right? Because all you would have done is put them right back on and then slide this into position. So let's take a look at section 10.3 and see how much pag oil we need to add to this. So if we look over here on refrigerant system capacities, condenser replacement, 0.75 ounces. So we're going to have to put 0.75 of an ounce inside this condenser before we remount it. All right, guys, one of the things we're going to check before we just blindly add that pag oil to the new condenser is we're going to see how much oil, if any, comes out of the old one. Because there's a possibility that we might have had more than the 22 milliliters, or 0.75 of an ounce, that was specified. And it's also possible, given what we got going on here, that we're not going to find any oil, right? You never know. I'm going to let this sit for a little bit and see if anything drains out of it. And if it does, we will replace what came out of this if it's more than what the service manual said. Otherwise, we're only going to put in what the service manual said. All right, guys, old and new, so identical in every way. We've verified every little piece that we could. So now let's go ahead and add our oil to the new one. We actually did not get anything of an appreciable amount out of the old one. So I'm just going to add it in right here. And what I'm going to be using is this AC Delco 15118 or 12356151. This is probably an older number, and there's probably newer numbers I can show you and replace that. Doesn't have anything specific about the weighting on it, but I'll put it in the description. So 22 milliliters is what we're going to end up adding. I'm going to use this clean 10 milliliter syringe, and we're just going to put in 10 milliliters at a time. Right, so just like that. I'm going to put, let it settle down in there, and I'm also going to put some in the other orifice as well. As soon as we got this done, and we get all the bubbles to pop out, and we let it all drift down towards the dryer at the other end, then we'll go ahead and get it remounted. All right, guys, sometimes you have to move it a little bit to let it trickle its way through the system. Once you can't see the oil anymore up on the end here, then you can put the caps back on until you get it in position underneath. If you had this leak discovered only through the halogen leak detector and you didn't have dye, what you can do also at this time, since you've got a major component out like this, or the compressor, is a good time to add one of these pre-filled jars, or charges rather, of the dye. This AC Delco tracer dye, 15120, 1234, 6287. There's a quarter of an ounce in here. you would just put it in here along with the oil, and that would give you a charge. This is 1/4 ounce for the entire system. All right, so let's go ahead and get it remounted, and then we'll get our new seals in. All right, guys, I'm not going to be able to film popping this in, but I want to show you how it attaches at the top. So if we take a look at the very top, on the corner where the radiator is, you see that little black bracket, if you will. If we zoom in up here on the top, this guy right there, that's where the tabs on the condenser slide in. So there's one here on the passenger side, and there's another one over here on the driver's side, right there in the corner, right up in the corner there. And you're just going to align the condenser so the tabs slide in to those brackets, okay? Yeah, right there. Let me come down and show you the tabs I'm referring to on the condenser itself. Right, so the tabs we're referring to are right here. There's one on each side. That's going to slide into those black brackets. And then if we take a look down here at the very bottom tab, you see this one's notched so that you can get the bolt in here. That'll help hold it for you until you get the bolt on the other side. All right, guys, I want to show you one other thing on the mounting besides those two on the top. If we zoom in here to the view we've got on the mirror, you can see there's a slot up on the top part of the condenser, and then there's this cutout right here, and there's a little metal dowel and a little metal tab that fit into this. So as part of you sliding it up, you're also going to slide it into these two and then down. And that's the last piece of the attachments before you put the bolts in, the two 10 millimeters. All right, so continuing on past the PAG oil requirement, and after, like I said, you don't need to remove and reinstall these baffles. This seems to be a redundant step in my opinion. We talked about how to install the condenser on the upper mounting tabs. These two 10 millimeters go into 88 inch-pounds. New seals on both of these lines. They talk about on a separate section about the sealing washer replacement. I'll show you that in just a second. And both of those 13 millimeter bolts get tightened to 15 foot-pounds. Both this one here shown in the upper, as well as this one shown here on the lower. Both are 15 foot-pounds. At this point, they're going to have you go back and recharge the refrigerant system and then do a leak test. And that's it as far as the service manual is concerned. If we take a step back and look at those sealing washers, just to see what they have to say about that. Sealing washer replacement, because you can't reuse these washers. All they talk about is to determine, if you had one that failed, to try and see if you can figure out why it failed in case it's indicative of something else that needs to be done. And then they tell you do not reuse them, discard them. And then the installation procedure is pretty straightforward. They just slide onto the tube. Again, they make sure there's no cuts or damage to the seal. If there is, don't use it. If there happens to be a cap or tape, you'll need to remove that. You'll see on the condenser there's a plastic cap on both ports. And use a clean cloth to clean off the pipe. Install the new seal. Make sure that the washer is completely bottom against the face of the fitting. And then there might be a small gap of about 1.2 millimeters between the AC line and the AC component. That's fine. Just make sure you stick to torque values and you won't get into any problems where you squish this thing too hard. Remember, everything's aluminum here, so torque values are important. All right, guys, let's take our little rubber band off of here. Let's get our old seal off. This is going to be the smaller of the two seals. This would be the 9649 seal. And we're going to try really hard not to drop this on the ground, get any dirt on it. And it should be really snug to go on. And we're going to pull this guy off here. And then we're going to slide him into position. And we're going to do the same thing with this guy. Take this off. Take this off. Take this rusty old seal off. Just want to be careful we don't make any nicks or gouges on the pipe. This is going to be the 9648 seal, the larger of the two. All right, now let's get this upper bolt in. I have to block your view for a second just to get it started. Now we'll see if we can go find where we did with our electric ratchet and zip this guy on. And let's take a look at the torque values in the service manual. All right, guys, now that we've got everything torqued down, we're going to go ahead and vacuum the system for 45 minutes. We take a close-up at the gauges here. We're going to want to make sure that we get to negative 30 inches of mercury and that it can hold at negative 30 inches of mercury for at least 15 minutes. So we're going to run it for 45 to boil off any moisture that got sucked in during the repair, and then we're going to let it hold as a test to make sure there's no leaks in the new condenser or that we didn't create any leaks in installing the hoses back where they went. Make sure on your gauge set that both valves, high and low, are opened, and if you have a valve on the vacuum line like we do here, that one is also opened. So we're going to let it sit, and we'll come back when it's done, and we'll see how it's holding up the test and if it holds vacuum okay. All right, guys, as we go back and do the charge now, there will be a sticker somewhere in the underhood area. On this Cobalt, it's sitting right here. And so we can see that it's telling us that we need to use a system charge of 0.9 pounds. So remember, we pulled 0.2 out. We're going to put it back in on our scale to 0.9. That'll be that way we'll know we have a full charge. All right, guys, we passed our vacuum test. We had it sit for 15 minutes and had our 30 inches of negative mercury hold, so we don't have any leaks in the new condenser. That's great. And we just charged up from a virgin R134 container. Got it running into the low side, and as you can see on the gauge, we've put in the requisite 0.9 of a pound charge. So let's go inside and see how the temperatures are. All right, guys, we ran out of light because of how long the vacuum test took, but it was necessary towards the end of the day here. We're inside the vehicle right after doing the charge that you saw in the previous clip. We're just coming in with our temperature gauge that we left in the center. If you zoom in on that, hopefully there's enough light where you can see that we're sitting right around 39 to 40 degrees on here in the center port. So we've definitely fixed this problem. Just a leaky condenser was causing this situation where it was hot in the center but still a little cold in the right. Now we're uniformly sitting between 39 and 40 on all four of the ports on this AC vents, rather, on this Cobalt. So I hope this video helped you out. If you got any questions or comments about what we did or the procedure or anything about how we went through this, go ahead and leave them below. I'll try to help. If you found this video useful, it saved you some money, got your vehicle repaired or working, or you just found it entertaining, go ahead and pay it forward and hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.